Ainu DNA broke the East Asian map when scientists compared it to modern Japan. On a chart, the result looked as if it should be simple. Hokkaido sits inside Japan. Japan sits inside East Asia. Modern labels make the Ainu seem like they should fall neatly beside mainland Japanese, Koreans, Han Chinese, and other Northeast Asian reference groups. They did not. When researchers compared Ainu genomes with ancient skeletons, island populations, and continental groups, an older signal kept coming through the data. It pointed back to the Jomon, the hunter-gatherer peoples who lived across the Japanese archipelago thousands of years before rice farming transformed the islands. That was the first shock. The Ainu were not just a northern version of modern Japanese ancestry. They carried a strong Jomon-related signal that set them apart from most mainland Japanese and from many neighboring East Asian populations. The second shock came later. That signal was not sealed in time. Hokkaido was not a frozen museum. Northern Island archaeology, ancient Jomon bones, genome-wide comparisons, and Okhotsk-related ancestry all pointed toward a more layered story. The old map had one box for Japan. The genome kept more than one record. To understand why that mattered, the comparison has to be handled carefully. Scientists were not measuring worth. They were not ranking people. They were not proving superiority, purity, intelligence, destiny, or political ownership. They were comparing shared markers across genomes, tiny inherited differences spread across chromosomes. Some markers pass through mitochondrial DNA, which follows maternal lines. Some pass through the Y chromosome, which follows paternal lines. Many more are scattered through the full genome, like small marks copied from ancestors no family story can name. When enough of those marks are compared, populations sometimes cluster near one another on a lab chart. That does not mean they are locked inside separate boxes. It means they share more inherited history with some sampled groups than with others. That caveat matters here. Words like Ainu, Jomon, Japanese, Korean, Siberian, and East Asian are not the same kind of word. Some are living identities. Some are ancient archaeological labels. Some refer to language, citizenship, geography, or scientific shorthand. None of them is a ladder. Ainu identity is cultural, historical, linguistic, and living. It includes memory, community, ceremony, land, language, and survival under pressure. DNA can trace part of that record, but it cannot decide who belongs to a people. That caution is not decoration. For generations, the Japanese state forced the Ainu into assimilation. Language, names, ceremonies, hunting practices, and land ties were targeted by policies that tried to make northern indigenous identity disappear into a national category. So when Ainu DNA is discussed, the question cannot be treated like a puzzle on a screen. It touches living people. The science still matters. It can show continuity that older histories ignored. It can expose migrations that national labels hide. It can reveal that the story of Northeast Asia was never as clean as the maps in schoolbooks made it look. Once that safety line is clear, the old model can be drawn. Look first at the Japanese archipelago, a long chain of islands reaching from subtropical Okinawa to cold Hokkaido. To the west sit Korea and northern China. To the north are Sakhalin, the Kuril Islands, the Russian Far East, and the Sea of Okhotsk. Hokkaido lies near the hinge of those worlds. The simple version says Japan began with the Jomon. For thousands of years, Jomon communities lived by hunting, fishing, gathering plants, making pottery, building settlements, and using the coastal richness of the islands. Their world left behind shell mounds, clay figures, stone tools, lacquered objects, and burial grounds. Then, during the Yayoi period, migrants from the continent brought wet rice agriculture, new tools, new social forms, and new ancestry into parts of the archipelago. Over time, those continental-related lineages mixed with older Jomon-related lineages. Modern mainland Japanese ancestry formed from that deep mixture. That model explained a great deal. It showed why many mainland Japanese people do not look genetically identical to ancient Jomon individuals, but also do not look purely continental in ancestry. They carry both sides of the story. It also helped explain why Ryukyuan people in the southern islands often appear shifted toward Jomon-related ancestry compared with many mainland Japanese groups. The south preserved one kind of island history, the north preserved another. Then came the Ainu. In population studies, Ainu-related ancestry often appears much closer to ancient Jomon genomes than typical mainland Japanese ancestry does. The comparison is not perfect, because no living group is a direct copy of an ancient skeleton. Still, the pattern was clear enough to disturb the simple map. The Ainu were not merely Japanese in the modern national sense. They were not simply another continental East Asian population either. They carried a stronger echo of the ancient island hunter-gatherer world. One proof object became especially powerful: ancient Jomon remains from northern Japan. On Ribun Island, off the northwestern tip of Hokkaido, archaeologists recovered human remains from the Funadomari site. The bones came from a cold northern island world of shorelines, sea winds, fishing grounds, and long seasonal pressure. When researchers analyzed DNA from a Jomon individual associated with that region, the genome became a rare window into the ancestry that existed in northern Japan before later historical layers. Studies published in journals including Nature and Communications Biology have used ancient genomes and modern comparison panels to test how Jomon-related ancestry fits into living populations. The exact percentages vary by model, sample, and method, but the direction is consistent enough to matter. Ainu ancestry shows especially strong affinity to ancient Jomon ancestry. That was where the first model broke. If modern national labels were enough, the Ainu should have disappeared into a general Japanese or Northeast Asian cluster. Instead, the genome pointed backward. It showed that the northern archipelago had kept an older signal alive. But the chart did not say the Ainu were untouched by history. That would be another myth. The first answer sounded simple: the Ainu preserved Jomon ancestry. The second layer was stranger. Ancient DNA does not work like a family crest. A skeleton from Funadomari is not a certificate. It is one body from one place, preserved by chance, read with modern tools, compared against limited samples. Still, it can reveal a pattern that written history never fully recorded. Picture the lab screen. On one side are modern reference groups from mainland Japan, Korea, China, Siberia, the Russian Far East, and island populations. On the other side is DNA recovered from ancient bones, often from the dense petrous part of the skull, one of the best places to preserve old genetic material. The computer does not know modern political borders. It compares inherited markers. It measures shared drift, a technical way of asking which groups have inherited more of the same genetic changes since older ancestral populations separated and mixed. Again and again, Ainu-related samples showed a strong connection to Jomon-related ancestry. Mainland Japanese samples showed that connection too, that usually at lower average levels, because later continental ancestry became a major part of the mainland population. That detail matters. The finding does not say the Ainu alone are connected to the Jomon, while everyone else replaced them. It says the Japanese archipelago holds different degrees and shapes of Jomon-related continuity. Mainland Japanese identity was shaped by mixture between older island ancestry and later continental ancestry. Ryukyuan ancestry often preserves another visible island signal. Ainu ancestry preserves a particularly strong northern Jomon-related line, layered with later contacts. That is why the result shocked researchers and viewers. It did not place the Ainu outside human history. It placed them inside a deeper and more complicated version of it. The forbidden temptation is to turn that into a purity story. The evidence points the other way. Ainu DNA does not show a sealed ancient people untouched by the world. It shows continuity under contact. It shows that ancestry can survive even when languages change, borders move, and states rename the land. The old map wanted a clean division. Japanese here, continent there. Indigenous past somewhere behind it. The genome showed a coastline instead, with people moving, mixing, marrying, trading, fighting, and surviving around cold seas. Hokkaido was never an empty edge. To the north of Hokkaido lies Sakhalin. Farther along the arc are the Kuril Islands, Across the water are the lower Amur region, Kamchatka, and the maritime worlds around the Sea of Okhotsk. These were not blank spaces beyond civilization. They were routes. Boats moved across them. Hunters followed sea mammals. Fishers used coastal resources. Communities left shell mounds, harpoons, bone tools, pottery, bear ritual traces, and human burials. Teeth and skulls from these northern worlds carry clues that written chronicles often missed. Long after the earliest Jomon communities, another cultural layer appeared in the north, the Okhotsk culture. Archaeologists associate it with maritime people connected to Hokkaido, Sakhalin, and the Sea of Okhotsk region. They lived with the sea at the center of their economy, using marine mammals, fishing, and northern coastal networks. When scientists compare Ainu ancestry, many models describe it as layered. A substantial Jomon-related foundation is one part. Later input connected to Okhotsk or other Northeast Asian northern sources is another. Mainland Japanese-related ancestry can also appear, shaped by later historical contact. The evidence points in a narrower direction. Ainu origins cannot be reduced to one ancient source. Some studies connect part of the northern layer to populations around the lower Amur River or broader Siberian and Northeast Asian coastal worlds. That does not mean the Ainu came from one single northern people. It means Hokkaido sat inside a contact zone. The Sea of Okhotsk was not a wall, it was a cold corridor. This is where the ancient scene becomes filmable. A shell mound on a northern coast, a bear skull placed with care, a sea mammal hunting tool worn smooth by use, a grave under wet island soil, a petrous bone carried into a clean lab centuries later, a computer comparing fragments of inheritance that no written record preserved. That chain is fragile. A single tooth can hold a clue. One ancient genome can shift a model. One missing community can leave a gap that no later sample can repair. There is another layer people often expect in these stories: archaic humans. Neanderthal and Denisovan ancestry exist in many Eurasian and East Asian populations because modern humans mixed with older human groups after leaving Africa. Some East Asian and indigenous Oceanian populations carry different amounts of Denisovan-related ancestry, but that is not the main explanation for the Ainu result. The Ainu comparison is not shocking because of a unique, extinct human signal. It is shocking because Jomon-related ancestry, Northern Maritime ancestry, and later Japanese history do not line up with modern labels. Archaic introgression belongs to the broader human story, but using it as the answer here would overstate the evidence. The genome kept one more record, and it was more human than mythical. The Ainu signal points to survival through pressure. It shows that ancient island ancestry did not vanish when later migrants transformed the mainland. It shows that northern contacts did not erase the Jomon-related foundation. It shows that living identity can carry histories older than the states that now govern the map. That is harder to summarize, but it is closer to the truth. The word Ainu itself refers to a living indigenous people, especially associated with Hokkaido, with historical ties also reaching towards Sakhalin and the Kuril Islands. Their culture includes oral traditions, ritual practice, clothing, carving, music, ecological knowledge, and a language severely damaged by forced assimilation. For a long time, Japanese national history treated the Ainu as a problem to absorb, not a people to recognize. During the 19th and 20th centuries, Hokkaido was colonized and reorganized under Japanese rule. Ainu land use was restricted, hunting and fishing practices were controlled. Children were pushed toward Japanese language and identity. Names and customs were pressured into silence. The result was not only genetic mixing, it was cultural loss. That is why DNA evidence has to be spoken with restraint. It can support the reality of deep regional continuity. It can show that Ainu ancestry is not an invention and not a costume. It can challenge the idea that northern Japan was always culturally and biologically identical to the mainland. But DNA cannot decide who is really Ainu. A person may belong through family, community, recognition, memory, and lived cultural connection, even when a commercial DNA test says nothing useful. Another person may carry some distant genetic trace without being part of Ainu community life. The genome is evidence, not a judge. Consumer ancestry tests are especially limited here. Most are built from reference panels that are uneven across the world. Indigenous populations are often underrepresented, and there are ethical reasons for caution. Communities have the right to decide how their biological samples are used, stored, compared, and described. If a test fails to show Ainu ancestry, that does not prove it is absent. The database may be too small. The category may not exist. The company may assign old ancestry to a broader Northeast Asian label. A hidden percentage can disappear inside a modern box. If a test claims a precise indigenous percentage, that does not automatically settle identity either. The number depends on reference samples, algorithms, and company choices. It should not be used to override communities or family histories. This is where the comparison becomes morally serious. The same science that reveals deep continuity can also be misused. It can tempt outsiders to sort people into rigid categories. It can invite old fantasies about blood. It can turn living indigenous people into museum objects. That would betray the evidence. The Ainu story is not about frozen ancestry. It is about a people whose history passed through colonization, stigma, survival, and recognition. Japan legally recognized the Ainu as an indigenous people in the 21st century, but recognition on paper does not restore a language overnight or return every lost practice. Ancient DNA can place one more witness on the table. It says that the northern archipelago carried a deep signal that modern labels blurred. It says Hokkaido was not a late footnote to Japan. It was part of an older world of islands, coasts, forests, and seas. The opening comparison can now be read differently. The shocking result was not that Ainu DNA floated outside East Asia. It did not. The Ainu are part of Northeast Asian history. The shock was that East Asia itself was more layered than the label suggested. On the chart, a small cluster can look technical and cold. In reality, it holds migrations around the Sea of Japan, contacts across the Sea of Okhotsk, Jomon lineages that reached across millennia, and later pressures from the Japanese state. That is where the old map failed. Pull the evidence together and a different picture appears. Ancient Jomon people lived across the Japanese archipelago for thousands of years before the Yayoi transformations. Later continental-related migrants helped form the ancestry of many mainland Japanese populations. Ryukyuan people in the south preserve another reminder that Japan was never one simple genetic block. Ainu people in the north preserve an especially strong Jomon-related signal, with later northern Okhotsk or Siberian-related input and varying mainland Japanese contact. None of these layers cancels the others. They sit on top of one another like buried floors in an old settlement. A potsherd in a Jomon site, a tooth from Ribun Island, a shell mound on a cold coast, a bear ritual trace in Hokkaido, a genome comparison in a modern lab. Each object gives only part of the record, but together they break the simple identity box. The phrase East Asian DNA can sound like one thing. It is not one thing. Northeast Asia holds deep splits, coastal movements, farming expansions, hunter-gatherer continuity, northern maritime networks, and repeated contact across islands and seas. The Ainu sit at one of those crossroads. They connect to ancient island hunter-gatherers through Jomon-related ancestry. They connect to northern maritime worlds through later Okhotsk-related layers. They connect to modern Japanese history through pressure, admixture, and state power. They also remain a living people, not a genetic exhibit. That is why the title's comparison matters. Scientists compared Ainu DNA to East Asia, and the result shocked everyone, because the answer refused to obey modern labels. It did not say Japanese was enough. It did not say Siberian was enough. It did not say ancient remnant was enough. It showed a record older and more complicated than the boxes. Return to Hokkaido. Picture the lab chart beside the island map. The points on the screen are not just points. They are shorelines, winter forests, northern seas, burial grounds, boat routes, and families whose names were sometimes changed by force. A modern nation can draw a border in a day. A genome carries older movement much longer. That does not make DNA sacred. it makes it useful when read with care. It can correct a flattened story. It can show that people dismissed as marginal were central to the history of a region. It can remind viewers that the human family tree is less like a straight trunk and more like roots crossing under old ground. The Ainu did not break the map because they were outside humanity's pattern. They broke it because the map was too simple. That is the deeper result. Ainu DNA does not prove purity. It does not prove isolation. It does not prove superiority over any other people. It shows continuity, mixture, pressure, and memory. Modern labels arrived late. The genome preserved older movements through islands, coastlines, forests, river mouths, and northern seas. It kept traces of Jomon ancestry, contact with maritime northern peoples, and the long shadow of Japanese history. For viewers who read evidence carefully, that is the real power of ancient DNA. It does not flatten people into blood. It restores complexity where the map became too clean. Subscribe to the Genome Archive for careful genetic history, ancient DNA mysteries, and the parts of the human record ordinary maps leave out. No hierarchy, no purity myth. Only evidence, survival, mixture, and memory.